So I was just walking through with Connor. We were going over logistics. So Elizabeth, as you know, we're condensing the time this year, hopefully to eliminate attrition for teams. Instead of having an entire semester to work on it, we're thinking about a month. So the registration deadline is going to be February the 21st. The registration link is there, and I see that you've joined the document as well, so that's great. The executive summary will be due on the 11th, so that's 8 days before the competition, which is going to be held on the 19th, and that's so that the judges have a full week in order to review your executive summaries and begin to prepare any notes or any research that they might want to do beforehand. Competition itself is going to be virtual again. It's going to be on the 19th through Zoom, and I'm hoping that we can do it just back to back to back, but if it ends up being the case because of class constraints or judge time constraints, we might break that up. But as we're planning right now, Friday the 19th in the afternoon. Any questions about dates or logistics up front?
No, that looks good.
So for the teams, when I know that last year there was kind of like a school judging, is that going to be earlier, or is that basically gone this year?
Do you mean like the school competition before the
Yeah, there's
international
like
competition?
the school, yeah.
Yeah, that's what this is. This
Okay,
is the
so
school's
that's
competition.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the winner of this competition will be the one that represents the school at the international competition in April. Okay, good question. So team structure, pretty basic, 2 to 5 students. The preference is that they're Busch school students, though they don't have to be. As long as at least half are Busch school students, that's probably fine, and we're probably not even going to be sticklers about that. I don't think we've ever had that issue before, but you can secure, we're making this optional for this round, a faculty advisor. Although Elizabeth, as you know, highly recommended. You can get a lot of really great feedback and have questions asked by people that are experienced. If you guys don't have a faculty advisor yet, let me know. I have a short list of faculty that I think would be great. Any questions about the team structure or finding an advisor? Okay. So the competition is based on the International Business Ethics Case Competition, which typically has 3 different components to the competition. So there's a 25-minute presentation, a 10-minute presentation that's answering questions that you got from the first presentation, and then a 90-second elevator pitch, more or less, just summarizing the arguments you've been making. For the business schools competition, for this qualifier, you're only doing a 25-minute presentation. So you present in front of a group of judges, and you'll have a grace period of 5 minutes on either side of this 25 minutes. So basically you need to go for at least 20 minutes and at most 30 minutes on your presentation time. If you go under 20 minutes or over the 30 minutes, then you'll begin to deduct points from your score. So aiming for that 25 minutes is probably the best way to do it. It's even easier now that we're doing this on Zoom because you can just have your stopwatch open on your computer, which is what I recommend. After the presentation is over, you'll have an additional 10 minutes of questions from the judges, and they can only ask questions. So I'll be there to moderate, but if a judge starts to, because we've had this happen in the past, starts to pick holes in your presentation and make comments and things, we'll get them back on track and just have them ask questions for clarification or maybe to look at a chart that you've put together again. But that's just so that they can get more clarification on the arguments you're making and the data that you're using to support those arguments. It's expected that all the members will participate in the presentation, and you will be deducted points if, say, you have a team of 4 and 2 of the 4 do the vast majority of the talking and the other 2 don't really say much at all or maybe nothing. So try to spread out the distribution of speaking adequately and have good flow between members. That's really important for making a good presentation, as you guys know at this point in your academic careers. It says here that other teams will be in the audience observing, but again, that's subject to the format of how the competition itself ends up being. Any questions about just the structure of that 25-minute presentation?
Nope.
Great. Okay, the executive summary, which I mentioned is due on March 11th. That is a 1-page single-space document that you'll need to submit, and it's not there yet, but I'll have a form that you can upload that to so that the judges can make sure that they get it. There's a sample format in this packet that you can use to submit your executive summary, and I'll get to that in a second. But the biggest thing that I want to point out is this is where you begin to address the judges as the particular audience that you want them to be. So for example, if you're doing like Elizabeth, you guys did last year with big data, you may want to address Congress, or you may want to address a regulatory body. In the past, teams have addressed trade industry representatives to make changes for aviation. Another has addressed state legislatures for state gun laws. So identifying your audience for the judges helps put them in the right mindset, and it helps contextualize the entire argument that you're making. So you'll need to include that in your executive summary. I just like to point that out now so that you can begin to think about it if you have a topic in mind. I have presentation guidelines here, and even below in this packet, there's even more that I'll get to in a second. So I think just for now, the expectation is that you dress professionally, that you address the judges as if they were that board, like I just mentioned. So saying like congressperson or director or whatever the imaginary title might be, just so that we're all on the same page and know who we're addressing. I've linked here to the 2020 videos that are uploaded from the International Business Ethics Case Competition. So your team last year, Elizabeth, is on there, and you can watch your championship winning video. You can also see from other teams that performed well. You can also see live videos from previous years there. So I encourage you just to take a look at maybe 2 or 3 of those to familiarize yourself with the way students and teams have presented and the kinds of topics that have done well. The International Business Ethics Case Competition website is a great place just for general resources as well. There's a link to that on this packet as well. If you have any other questions about that, you can let me know and I can get you to the right spot. We'll come back to the executive summary and the presentation, so I'm just going to move on now. And if you have questions at that point, we'll get to them. The judges' criteria is a little different than the international competition. So there's 6 criteria that you'll be judged on, and it's a score of 1 to 6, and then an overall category that will be out of 12, so it's worth double points. The legal dimension, the financial or business dimension, the identification of your ethical issue, and the solution to your ethical issue. So we split. So there's legal, financial, ethical. We split ethical into 2 dimensions because it is a business ethics case competition. And then persuasiveness, so how well you're able to argue your case, and then your presentation skills. So the things that we've seen students have the most trouble with in the past is identifying what exactly the ethical issue is. So a case has been made, for example, the one I remember off the top of my head is the airline industry proposal that I saw a few years ago. They were saying that airlines that used what they called predatory ticketing practices, that was unethical, but they really failed to identify what ethical principle might be violated there, because people were still able to buy tickets and people still were buying tickets. So what role does consent play in ethics? It's not something that I remember them talking about. So being really clear on why the issue you've brought up or issues you bring up are ethical issues is going to be really key. And then providing the solutions, I think, is probably where students excel, because students are very creative at coming up with ways to fix problems, which is really great. So if you're going to focus more of your time and you want to especially work with an advisor, I'd say that 3rd criterion is the most important one to work with them with. Of course, the legal and financial are important too, but you can tell they're just their own separate up to 6 points dimensions themselves, and they should really serve the ethical issue rather than be kind of on a silo out on their own. And then finally, because we know that all people are different and have different perspectives on how well people do in competitions, I'm going to use a normalization formula in order to make the scores as fair as possible. So for example, there's 4 judges and 1 judge gives all consistently high marks to everyone. Another judge thinks that a C is a very good grade, as you may have had a professor like that. We need to figure out a way to make those 2 scores speak and dance with one another, so to speak. And so that's what the goal is there. Any questions about the judging criteria or how you'll be scored? Okay. Here's the executive summary template. I recommend you just copy and paste this into your own Google document and then fill it in. You can find examples of executive summaries on the IBEC website. So if you want to see what those look like, you can also look at, Elizabeth, what you guys used last year. But following this is what I recommend. So you see you've really only got about half a page for your executive summary. So you want a paragraph introducing who you are and what the problem is you're going to address. And then in the second paragraph, which I say paragraph, maybe 2 to 3 sentences, so not like a fully developed paragraph, to talk about what the ethical issues actually are. And then in the last paragraph, you should mention briefly and hint at the solutions that you're going to suggest. So you don't want to give away all of your project, but you do want to outline kind of where you're going to go in your presentation and why it's an important topic. The executive summary will be part of your presentation skills. That's where the grade will go in for, or the score will go for there. It is part of the score, but it's not a huge part. But taking it seriously can really help the judges understand where you're coming from and set the rest of your presentation up well. Any questions about the executive summary? Okay. Of course, make sure it's edited, no typos, no misspellings, that kind of stuff. And then here's some guidelines that I put together. There's basically two different approaches you can take for this presentation. And one students always do, and the second students never do. So the one that students always do is tackling a current problem in business. So for example, the big data and privacy issues that were tackled last year, that's still very hot. People are still talking about those things and what kind of regulations we need to have. In the past, it was Starbucks and fair trade coffee, bump stocks on guns, things that were in the media being talked about at the time. You're addressing what the ethical issues are there and offering solutions to those current problems. So that's what students almost always do, and I understand why. But the one that I think I would, if I were doing it, that I would do is picking a problem from the past and addressing what was done to address that situation, what was done well and what was done poorly, and then offering alternative solutions. So one is a historical look and the other is a current look. Again, I'd say the historical one's probably the one that in my mind would be a little easier because you can see the fruit of what solutions were proposed and what were implemented, and then you can critique those. It can also give you more of a framework to build your presentation around. But it makes sense a lot of times just to do a current event because there's so much talk about it. Any questions about those two approaches?
Sorry, I accidentally clicked out of the Zoom for a second. So for the historical one, like we did a current issue last year, so this is why I'm. So would we be criticizing the response, or could we say like this was a really good response and here's why?
Yeah, you could say that it was a good response either way. I mean, if you want to do like the ExxonMobil oil spill in like what was it, like 1990 in Alaska, and you want to analyze the response to that and then the regulations that came from it, you want to say that they were good, or you want to say that they were bad? That could be an example.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That
Could
makes sense.
you look at like a past example, but then draw a parallel to a current example and show how like what was done in the past could be applied and kind of do both?
I'd say if you're going to do that, you're probably going to want to address a current issue, and then you could use that past situation to support your argument for the solution you're offering for the current issue. Does that make sense?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So the focus wouldn't be like talking about both as one presentation. You'd use the earlier situation as evidence for your current situation. So that's a very common way, but one of the only ways I think that you can argue in a court is precedent. So that's what you're looking at and using as precedent in that case. Any other questions about those two approaches? Okay. So I already said this, but just to make sure we're going over it financially, you have a financial, legal, and ethical dimensions. The financial should be numbers, talking about the economic impact of both the ethical problem and then also the solutions that you draw. The second is the legal issues. Are there any regulations? Are there any laws on the books? Are there any ordinances in specific municipalities that you need to take into consideration? Are there any, for example, UN standards that need to be considered? So that legal dimension can be as specific as law, or it can be as broad as best practices within a particular industry. So it's always a good thing to look at, if you're like the airline example, to look at one, what does the FAA say and what does Congress pass that's law? But then two, what do airline industries recommend for the airlines that they represent to do for best practices that aren't necessarily law? They're not going to get in trouble if they don't abide by them, but it's kind of an industry expectation. And then lastly, the ethical issues. So there's more here that I won't read through, but the one thing that we have to keep in mind, I know that we're at the Catholic University of America, and the church's teaching and the history of philosophy informs a lot of the education that we get here. And all that is good and right, but for this competition, because the international competition doesn't want you to explicitly cite religious or philosophical figures or authorities, we need to think about ways that you can translate those teachings and those principles into more business, common, public sphere, public space vernacular. So, for example, you would get points taken off if you cited explicit in your presentation something that Pope John Paul II said, or that Aristotle said, or that James Baldwin said, whomever. You need to take those principles and apply them as principles, not as quotations or as authorities on something. Does that make sense? We'll be a little more lenient in this qualifying competition on that, but if your team wins and you go to the international competition, that will be something that they've been directed to take off points for. Any questions on either of those three dimensions?
Nope.
Okay. There's the link to the IBEC website and also to the 2020 videos again. And then this last page is what the judge's scorecard looks like, just in case you want to have a glimpse at it. So that's basically it. Do you guys have any other questions, logistics, otherwise about the competition?
I was going to say that I haven't looked into getting us a faculty advisor yet. Like if you do have a list of people who said they would be interested or something, maybe if you'd be willing to just like email that to the three of us, and then maybe because Chris isn't here, I don't want to be like, oh yeah, like we'll take that person. Like maybe we could talk about who we might want to ask about it.
Yeah, I can send that out. That's not a problem.
And if anything else, I think Professor Alvarado might be interested in doing it again with us. I don't know, like I've experienced with him, but I don't know if he's said that he would be interested in doing it again.
I think he would be a great one to do it again. So if you have rapport with him, you could certainly ask.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
No, I think it'll be good.
Okay, great. Well, make sure you get registered by the 21st. And if you have any other questions between now and then, you can email me and I'm happy to hop on a call to talk about any of it.
Great. Thank you so much, Brett.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Looking forward to it.